Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Kimberly Williams, Chief Innovation Officer, Metropolitan Transit Authority of Harris County.
Good morning. Good morning, APTA friends and colleagues, and welcome to this general session. I'm honored to moderate this morning's panel as we close out our capstone event for this great rail conference. This morning, we'll be taking a 30,000-foot view of public transit's role in modern cities. We all know that cities are changing. Technology, rider preferences, new mobility options, street management policies, sustainability, resiliency, vehicles, and infrastructure. These are just a few of the forces transforming our new landscape. Our challenge as rail professionals is to operate in this new landscape as we plan it for what's ahead. We're not going to solve all of this puzzle today, but we'll do our best to explore some of these trends. So let's get started. We've assembled a team of distinguished experts, all with different viewpoints and perspectives and insights. You can read their full bios on the conference app, so I'll just briefly introduce each of them, and please hold your applause as I do. First to the stage, I'd like to welcome Greg Percy, Chief Operating Officer of Metrolinx right here in Toronto, and a member of APTA's Executive Committee. Next, we have Harriet Trigani, Director of the New Urban Mobility Alliance. And following Harriet, who, by the way, if you haven't had a chance to look at your New York Times today, she was quoted in one of the op-eds today, so if you get a chance to look at that, I thought that was pretty interesting. Next up, we have Shaylin Batt, who's President and CEO of the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. And closing out our list of distinguished panelists this morning is Andrew Miller, the Associate Director of Mobility at Sidewalk Labs, again, right here in Toronto. Please help me welcome them. So everyone is talking about smart cities. What does that mean from your vantage point? Harriet, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think smart cities are cities that are using technology to improve their operations and to accomplish some of the other goals that so many cities have, to make their cities competitive and prosperous, to make their cities efficient, to make their cities sustainable and low carbon, to make them more affordable and convenient. And technology has the potential to offer all of those improvements in cities that they so desperately want, but they also have the potential to increase the disparities that already exist. If you just think about who adopts technology soon, how costly those early technologies might be to deploy. So I think smart cities is a word that needs to be, or a phrase that needs to be parsed when it comes down to how it gets applied in cities.
So Greg, from your vantage point, what does that mean for passenger rail?
The word that comes to mind for me is the word integration. And it's about waking up that commuter rail or any rail should not be looking through a very narrow lens. It should be realizing that it's going through the backyards of North America, that we have an impact on communities, that how we build matters. And that if you take it a little bit further, there's the integration between transportation and city building.
So Andrew, there's a lot of conversation about walkability, pedestrian use in smart city conversations. So tell us about Sidewalk Labs and kind of what you all do.
So Sidewalk Labs, we are an alphabet company. So Google and Waymo are our sister companies. And many of you may know, because it's been in the news a lot this week, we have just released our plan for I won't say smart city, but a city of the future here on the Toronto waterfront. Not far from here, actually. And we don't use the term smart city. We think it's reductive because it implies that all you need to do to make a great city is take some circuit boards and internet and spackle it over everything and done, you've got a smart city. We think instead you need to take technology and the best of urbanist thinking and bring them together. So what you asked me about was walkability and cyclability. That you don't need an internet to make a better bike lane. We are going to use technology to make really great bike lanes, but the first thing we're going to do is just make wider bike lanes and make sure that they are everywhere. Make sure that there's pedestrian space everywhere. That takes you a lot of the way that you need to go. Technology will help, and if people are interested, I can tell them all about at length how technology will help, but you don't need it to make a great neighborhood by any means.
Right. So Shaylin, tell us where you think technology will fit in terms of passenger transport, in terms of walkability, and some of the issues that Harriet mentioned.
Yeah, I think that I think we get caught up on the technology piece a lot because it's just cool, and we talk about predictive analytics and big data and quantum computing and how it applies. But I think in the context of a smart city, I think one, smart city is a brand, it's a moniker, it's what everybody wants to be known as. But I think from a transportation perspective, what it means is we've got to stop worrying about, how many cars does this highway move, or how many vehicles and trucks are we moving. And the smart cities are the ones where we're talking about how are we moving people, data, and freight in the most intelligent fashion. And I think safety is a big issue. We have a real problem, to the extent that you want to make people walk and bicycle, they got to feel safe doing it. So as Andrew said, I think you need more bicycle lanes out there. Greener is a big piece for us. I think that more and more in the conversation now, it's about resiliency, the carbon footprint of transportation, and then quite frankly, over half of the traffic congestion in the United States comes from non-recurring incidents. So we can operate the system a lot more effectively and cut down a lot of this congestion. And I think rail plays a key role in that.
And I'll throw this to anyone who wants to answer. So you mentioned resiliency, and sustainability is another conversation we hear a lot about, particularly in my hometown of Houston. That's a big topic. How are your respective areas dealing with resiliency and sustainability?
Happy to respond to that. The number one attention getter for us in terms of resiliency is it's not just about technology and that kind of thing. It's about extreme weather resiliency. As probably most of the people in the audience realize, climate change is a big factor, and a lot of the infrastructure that we depend on was designed when there's a different climate condition. And now we're going back and looking at all our critical infrastructure, saying how do we make it more resilient? And then how do we design our service around that? How do we design our technology around that? Frankly, from a service delivery point of view, our biggest vulnerability is more technology than it is the old school of, do trains and work and do bridges stand up? It's about the technology because we've become so technology dependent. So that's another major factor for us.
Are you using particular apps or anything to facilitate those
interactions? We have some apps, but I think you got to get your head around it first and figure out, because if you have an app, then that means you know what your problem is. We're still early stage in terms of figuring out where we want to fix first. So coming up with a good tactical plan is really, for me, more important than having an app that will fix pieces of it. That becomes important later, but not at the front end.
Shaylin, you were going to
Yeah, so just a few things. I think 28% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States come from the transportation sector. So obviously there's a huge opportunity for decarbonization right there. Just in a couple of my previous roles when I was in Colorado, when you're planning your system, we didn't really bring in resiliency into it until later on, and we figured out that there were all these pipes under some of our critical infrastructure that with more and more intense rainfall events, if you lose those pieces of your system, the whole piece falls apart. And I was on the Northeast Corridor Commission, which is the rail line that goes from Boston down to Washington, and we saw during Superstorm Sandy how New Jersey Transit and New York City were paralyzed, and the rail infrastructure were paralyzed in those storms. But it's also heat affecting the catenary and the rail. And so I think we're gonna have to get a better sense of what the new normal is and incorporate those into those plans.
I think one of the things that's interesting to think about is our auto dependency and how some of the disruption we're seeing so much. We're getting more of this micromobility introduced in U.S. cities than any other part of the world because our current transportation system is so inefficient. And I'm not really speaking about transit. I'm speaking about the vast majority of all the trips taken in the U.S. that are taken by car. But what we don't always realize, because we've all grown up with it, is that it's very expensive, automobility. You know, to have a depreciating durable good that you use 5% of the time and park 95% of the time, but pay for all the time. And some of our resilience is not just with respect to climate change, but also with respect to the economic crises that are happening. In 2008, when I was the planning director in DC, I saw hundreds of cars drop off the DMV rolls in 2008. I thought people were fleeing the jurisdiction. They were dialing down their transportation costs because they could. And the 3 innermost jurisdictions of the Washington region, which is the same jobs and housing market, had almost no foreclosure or bankruptcy, and their property values dipped, but they didn't plummet. There are still parts of the DC region that haven't recovered their housing prices, and others have shot way ahead. So I would just say that part of resiliency is redundancy and having choices about how you can get around. And one of our common problem, whether you're in transit or whether you're trying to build a great city or you're trying to promote some of the alternatives that might be cheaper and better for the environment and healthier, is that automobility is very, very sticky, right? If you have 1 or 2 cars in your household, it turns out almost all the trips that you take are by car. And I think looking at being able to peel away some of that automobility, and a lot of our millennials and recent college grads are doing that, because car ownership is something that's out of reach given their crushing college debt. But they're also demonstrating how much better it might be to have more of these choices. And I think at a very basic level, resilience is having those choices whenever there's something that happens, a disaster that happens, that makes it possible for your community to continue to operate when there is a crisis.
If you look at our neighborhood, we are meeting a standard that is unprecedented, which is it's going to be a climate negative neighborhood. That is, it's not just going to be 100% lower emissions than a comparable neighborhood in Toronto, it's going to be below 100% lower. We're actually going to be offsetting emissions from other parts of the city. And the way that we get there, if you look at the plan, which I hope you do, I think it's a great read, is half of that approximately comes from smart innovations in sustainability. We're going to have thermal grids, we're going to have a microgrid so that we can generate our own green electricity. But more relevant for this audience, the other half of how we get there is on the mobility side. It's by driving trips away from private automobiles into other modes. Particularly transit, surface rail transit, which is electrical, particularly into bicycles and e-bikes, also carbon neutral, getting people out of cars, and as Harriet was saying, getting them to never own a car. Our neighborhood is going to have no long-term parking, none. And in return for that parking space, everyone's going to be offered a mobility as a service package for transit, for bike share, for subsidized ride hail, all of which means that when they move in, they can get rid of a car and never need to buy one. Because Harriet's absolutely right. Once you own a car, it seems to you, incorrectly, but it seems to you that owning a car has got no fixed costs, that it's free to take any trip. So we need to tackle that, nip that in the bud by making sure that the people that move in have no car or get rid of it almost right away. That's the future of urban mobility.
So, Shaylin?
So, and I think that, so my first job in transportation was actually here in Toronto. I worked for the Black Creek Regional Transportation Management Association. That's I think a precursor to like Smart Commute. And my job was to go out and to get people to do things like rideshare and use transit and take active modes of transportation. And everybody was like, great idea, get everybody else to do that so I can drive to work, right? And I was like, that's not what we're talking about. But I think that is also one of the challenges that we face. And I'm sure that all of these, as we look at these smart cities, I think part of the challenge, and this is true in Houston, this is true in the Washington, D.C. area, certainly true in the GTA, that for a lot of folks, they're still out in places like Mississauga and Scarborough and needing to get around. And so I think the question is, how do you get that multimodal aspect? How does micromobility allow us, if you're not even in one of these sort of like super dense MOS-enabled neighborhoods, how do we, from a regional perspective, use rail and micromobility so that people don't just have to get in their car? Because a lot of people, I think, in some of these suburbs feel like they're still their only choice.
So we talked about Moss and some of the concepts that you're deploying. We see a lot of technology that's disrupting the industry. So what do you see as the biggest disruptors coming, and how do you suggest that we face those?
From our perspective, we've got to fix what we call first mile, last mile. We have a very active rail system that we're expanding very quickly, but we have not properly fixed yet the first mile, last mile. How do you get from a GO station, from home to a GO station, vice versa? Or you're at destination, if there's no access, direct rail access for middle of Mississauga, then how do you fix that? And I think we've had lots of attempts at doing the same old, and that's not working. So we need to change gears, and it's looking at microtransit, it's looking at Uber, it's looking at unique partnerships that were really non-traditional, but they do start to make sense, because you can't be good at everything, and we're good at certain things, but we are not good at everything. So fess up to that and say, let's partner with someone who can do that better than we could. So we're doing that kind of things. We're having those conversations because we need to get that piece fixed. Only then will people start leaving their cars at home. Making your stations more accessible for bikes, for people to walk in and stuff, that helps a lot. But we still need to have that other piece. Together they can fix it.
Yeah, and I would just say that the big disruption is the pace of change. So when I was a director in Colorado, Denver made massive investments in Denver Union Station, a lot of federal money, a lot of federal support. And then RTD got rail from the airport in. I know Toronto now has the airport, the regular service in, which is kind of a hallmark of a great city. But that's taken a long time because that's just the speed at which we build big infrastructure projects. 2 years ago, I rode a scooter at the Detroit Auto Show, and I was like, what a gimmick, this will never go anywhere, which is why I run an association. I'm not actually making money in the private sector. This morning I was looking out at Toronto just from the hotel and picturing what the waterfront would have looked like 150 years ago with all the marine traffic. And then I started thinking, what does it look like in 20 years? And is it full of drones delivering passengers around? Because that's the next frontier, because that's where a lot of cities are going. And so I think that the big disruption is the pace of change, and how does government move and public sector agency move and maintain our systems while everything is changing so much around us.
Absolutely.
I think there's a specific data aspect of that, but maybe we'll get to it, or maybe there'll be questions about it. But I would also just put out there, the vision that some people have of autonomy in vehicles, particularly in private vehicles. There are definitely people who imagine a future, think of Elon Musk, where that autonomy is privately owned, and that every trip is a door-to-door trip by car, and that is a possible future. And I think that terrifies a lot of cities, that terrifies a lot of public health officials. I mean, but it's a vision that some people have that they would really like to see, and they're working very hard to try to make that happen. And I think that's a disaster for transit, obviously, but it's also a disaster for what we think of as cities. I mean, zombie vehicles driving around empty because it's cheaper if they're electrically powered than it would ever be to pay for parking, and just waiting for somebody to call them for a ride, right? So that would be pretty nightmarish.
Absolutely. And we've covered a lot of topics this morning. I do want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. There are 2 microphones, one over here on my left and the other here on my right. Does anyone have a question or would like to come to the microphone?
Before, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to answer that last question, because if you look at our plan, it's a list as long as my arm of mobility innovations, which I can go on about at length, like heated bike paths or dynamic curbs and dynamic streets so we can reassign space in the right-of-way. But the single biggest innovation in a Toronto context is we need rapid transit at our site. We need light rail transit to our site. If we don't have it, no one can get to our site. So the innovation is we're prepared to help pay for it. So Alphabet is offering up to $100 million in private capital to help deliver light rail transit to the Toronto waterfront. That is not as innovative as heated bike paths, but in the Toronto context, private funding to help deliver public transit, not privatization. We're not proposing to own or operate. We're proposing to put up funding to help get it built. The biggest problem that we have in the Toronto region is it's not that we don't know what to do. There's all sorts of projects that we know need to get built. It is that we don't build them. And one of the reasons we don't build them is we think that we don't have the money. So if what it takes is the private sector delivering funding to help make it happen, that is a disruptive innovation.
Well, you mentioned a key area that a lot of transit agencies and operators are looking at, public-private partnerships. So you mentioned your role in what you all are doing. Have you seen public-private partnerships work for what you're trying to accomplish in your communities?
I would just say that, I mean, I think of Eagle P3 as being one of the first successful transit P3s in the country in Denver that got out. There's lots of examples. Actually, I don't think the US is a great example of public-private partnerships. I think the rest of the world is doing it a lot better. The one thing I think, and I would agree with Andrew that it could be a game changer to introduce private sector funding and unlock all of that capital. I think one of the challenges that when I used to run transit is the idea of equity. So if private sector companies are coming forward and saying, we'll put $100 million in to build transit here, the challenge for a lot of us is there's large sectors of the city and region that also need that service that you can't just say, we're going to go and deliver light rail here because we've also got to go to other parts of the city that don't have it. And so I think that might be one of the challenges that also needs to be worked out because it's a bigger system.
In our case, the proposal that we want to get built is the city's articulated #1 surface rail priority. Perfect. So I'm not worried on that score.
So let me speak to P3. We live it, breathe it, and it's not as big in the United States, but look north. We're doing a lot, and we've completed 2 successfully. We will be going to market with the single largest commercial contract that's P3 in Canadian, if not North American history this summer. It's massive, it's a game changer. We had APTA up last summer, we spoke to them about that, and I think there was some eye-opening moments. So we're doing it, we're living it, and it's not easy. We're importing knowledge that we didn't have before, and that's a really cool thing about the kind of company we've become is that we're an international company doing internationally interesting things such as P3s. And so this will be a game changer, certainly for Toronto, Ontario, and for Canada, and I would think beyond. So yes, in a massively large way, yes, we have embraced P3.
I mean, I think in some ways P3 is the history of transit. Transit was created as part of real estate speculation to unlock land so that it would be available and convenient for development. And most of the successful projects, you know, the infill NOMA station in DC, the transit to the airport in Portland, were because there were real estate opportunities along the transit line that made the value proposition an easy one. So equity becomes an issue. But I also think part of the P3 potential, when we talk about the disruption of mobility that's happening, transit works best when it can have high frequency, you know, high ridership, compact routes in parts of the region that are supported by great land use, right? But no public agency can afford to only operate those routes right now. So you operate the other routes that are less dense, that are less high frequency, that are less well used, you know, at much greater cost per rider. So, you know, are there P3 opportunities to use some of these disruptors, even if they end up being part of your overall system, to deliver that service without as much cost, with smaller vehicles, with service that might be less frequent, but maybe that's okay because it can be more on demand. Right? It can be more, flexible and with vehicles of the appropriate size. So I think for me, that is a little bit the P3 frontier that some transit agencies are beginning to unlock, but, you know, I think has a lot of potential and should really be investigated. It's not just first mile, last mile, which is part of that solution, but there might be whole parts of the region where you currently have transit service that could be provided very differently, and you could more invest in those high capacity, high frequency lines, just figuring out how to get people to those lines from other parts of the region.
Completely agree. We have 4 light rail programs in play, all of them P3, or we call it AFP, and they're in play as well. So we're not just expanding our traditional rail, but we're expanding through light rail as well. And a really interesting thing that is really arguably a P3 spinoff is TOD, Transit-Oriented Development, and that is getting a lot of conversation in our company. We have the luxury of owning 80% of our operating network, and the new realty is the airspace. Is how do we do that smarter and faster and in lockstep with the private sector? So working with the private sector makes sense. I don't think it's the panacea. I think there's a lot of smart people in transit, and I think we can do a lot of things without the private sector. But if we can do it with, why wouldn't we? Right. You know. So let's figure out how to get the end game as opposed to worrying about are you public or private sector. So let's just get the work done. I think to your point, people are way more comfortable talking about doing stuff than actually doing it. So let's figure out how to do it, and then maybe have a little less talk about it.
So Greg, curious, what were some of the obstacles that you had to remove in order to facilitate your successful P3s?
We had to, first of all, figure out what it was. And I think you have to be honest to say, do we understand it? Do we have the knowledge in-house? And the answer was clearly not. We had a lot of smart people in our company, but we needed to import those who had already done it. And I think we get too xenophobic in terms of, we're afraid of someone else coming in and knowing stuff. Get rid of that thinking and bring in whoever is good at it. We have a CEO right now, Phil Verster, who has delivered on P3s before. So at the top of the company, bringing someone in who's done this before, and he's been on both sides of the public-private sector equation, as has most of us as the leadership of Metrolinx. So import the knowledge wherever it may be globally. And let's wake up. We're not a Canadian industry, we're not a North American. We are a global industry. Transit is global. So we have to stop putting boundaries around our thinking and say we're global. So get in the talent wherever you can get it from. You don't have to invent it at home. Bring it in if they've already done it. So we had to figure that part out, and it was a little bit of a mind game we had to get past. So we did that. And then you have to figure out what model, because there's multiple P3 models, what one fits, customize it to the work you want to do, and open your mind to figure out innovative ways to do it. So there's lots to do, and I'm not suggesting we're experts at it, but we're up for the game, and we're past the point of no return. And a lot of the business we do is P3 or AFP, as we call it.
So you mentioned an interesting issue. We talk a lot about innovation. We know change is coming to the industry. How do you handle it within your workforce? How do you get your workforce, which is used to doing the same thing a certain way, has kind of become entrenched in many ways? How do you create a culture of innovation among your workforce, among your stakeholders, to get them to embrace this new technology? You talked about autonomous vehicles, but we still have customers on one hand who welcome it, and other customers say, I'll never go near it. So how do you all handle innovation in terms of the human capital?
I can speak just for a second. I mean, I've worked in a lot of organizations, many of them government at the federal, state, and local level. And government, public agencies are not known for being super big risk takers. So I think that's the job of leadership, to create an environment where it's okay to experiment, where you're doing pilots, you're trying things, and you're kind of flexing your innovation muscle and making it safe to do so, making it okay to fail. Because basically, if you are doing things that only have a 100% chance of success, there's no way you're innovating, right? And there's no one who has all the answers out there. So I think that's a huge part of it, making it okay to fail and managing those expectations, because you have big challenges that you're trying to solve, and you want to leave no stone unturned to see what's the best way to solve those challenges.
So I work with a lot of folks from the tech sector a lot, and I hear this all the time. They say, I tell my people to fail, but fail quickly. Right, so if you're failing, that means you're going on to the next thing. I think it's overused a little bit. I think if you fail enough for a private sector company, you're encouraged to go fail elsewhere. Right. I've been appointed by 3 governors and 1 president on the public side. Nobody's told me to fail quickly or slowly, because it's a totally different value proposition, and our political environment in which we find ourselves now. So in Denver, there was an issue with some of the gates and alerting drivers that and so they had to station people out there to make sure that the gates were closing, and it was being positioned as a failure of government. It was actually a P3. The private sector side actually had to pay for it, And so it was actually a great example of a P3 working, government having taken all of the precautions, and it was still spun as public sector failure. And so I think part of our challenge, and it's probably more of a challenge in the US right now, in this hyper-political environment, it is really hard to create a culture of risk-taking on the public side when you've got all of these folks who see what happens when you take a little bit of risk. And I agree with you that it is leadership's responsibility to go out and say, if something bad if something bad happens, then we'll stand behind you and support you.
But I think part of it is managing that expectation about what is success. I mean, that's definitely not been my experience, that it wasn't possible to do, or that failure was absolutely a horrible word. The funny thing is that no one remembers the failure because the subsequent project that learned from those mistakes is a wild success, and then no one talks about our first bike share program in DC. No one knows about it, right? It's only the second one that people know. But
The mantra in Silicon Valley is move fast and break things, which is great if you're pounding out new iterations of code. It's terrible if you're moving human beings through space. That may sound glib, but I'm being utterly serious. I mean, before I came to Sidewalk Labs, I was a municipal civil servant. We hold people's lives, their welfare in our hands. When people in Toronto, they see our plan, there's a certain amount of concern because there's so much innovation that's being proposed. It's going to take an entire year of evaluation before we can get an up or down on it. I don't think that's unreasonable. Accommodating people to the idea that new things can be done, that can be done in a way that's going to respect people's safety, their well-being, and the public purse. I think that risk, being too tolerant of risk in an environment like that would be a dereliction of duty. So it is important to sort of habituate people to the idea that you can try pilots, and maybe if the pilot doesn't work, you can roll it back. But you have to be sensitive to people's desire that you are taking care of you're looking out for their interests. And if that slows the pace of innovation, well, I think so be it. That's the cost of doing business.
Absolutely.
So I think your question had two pieces to it. I think we've spoken about innovation, but I think your question was targeted also on how do you condition the workforce to P3? And it's really an excellent question because it's not simple. And first of all, you have to articulate what it is and make sure people understand the risks inside it. They're not all bad risks, and we talked about smart risks and good risk and getting stuff done. And so you have to communicate really well and to the front line. They need to understand they have lives, and they have to buy houses and have families and all the really important things. But there is life after transit, and so you have to connect with that, and you have to be honest and transparent. And so we're doing that. They think usually that you have a big plan and you're doing a slow reveal. So I speak very transparently with the team. I have a very large team. They do frontline delivery of our service. And so I say, I don't have a big plan. And we'll come back as often as you want us to talk to you about the scope of the work as we get clarity on what an informed owner is and what would move over to an entity called Project Co, which is how AFP and P3 works. We'll come and talk to you and we'll tell you. And we'll give you the information you need to make your personal decisions. I really want you to be satisfied in what you're doing. I want you to work here. And the only way you're going to do that is if we're honest with you and tell you. And I'll tell you whether it's good news or bad news. I don't sugarcoat, and I don't think you should. Because, again, you're playing with people's lives. So be straight up, get clarity as fast as you can, and deliver it as honestly as you can. And then you'll deal with the other stuff, and the other stuff will emerge, for sure. But deal with it.
Absolutely.
And I do think that another human component, and this came up yesterday, I was testifying in DC. The other part, and Andrew touched on this, I think that there's a lot of disruption coming, and the automation part that we talk about, not just through autonomous vehicles, but automation throughout our systems, throughout our networks. This is going to have a massive impact on labor markets, on people's lives, and I don't know that we're having the full conversation that we need. So it's not just within the organizations, but as you start to plan a future for automation of things like freight and transit that people are doing these jobs now, there's going to be and should be a healthy pushback and a robust discussion around that, because we can't just go out and tout benefits of automation without saying, how do we find jobs for all of these people, or what do we do from a workforce standpoint? Because I think that's going to be a big societal disruption.
Absolutely. Well, it has been a fascinating conversation. I want to thank you all. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. I want you to join me in thanking Greg, Shaylin, Harriet, and Andrew for a great panel discussion today. Thank you. And I think next coming to the stage will be our Apta President CEO, Paul Scalis. Thank you.
Thank you all. What a great conversation. Kimberly, thank you for that masterful moderation of that. And Shaylin, Greg, Harriet, Andrew, I wish we had more time. This is fantastic. We have spent the entire week here pretty much focused on rail and all those related issues. Obviously, it is the title of our conference. But this last session, I think, in many ways encapsulates what we're about. Whether you're a planner, whether you're a designer, whether you're in the management arena leading our change efforts here with regards to transportation and rail in particular, your knowledge of all these other issues, as our panelists and Kimberly have shared with us, the issues of what is a smart city, the issues of resiliency, of mobility, of the TNCs, all of these issues really come together, and we as professionals leading our efforts, whether our focus is entirely rail, need to understand the system that we're operating in, what our cities are expecting of us. And you heard from these leaders, I think, their individual perspectives and a lot of great information. So once again, I want to thank Kimberly, Shaylin, Greg, Harriet, and Andrew. Thank you again for your great contributions. Well, believe it or not, right? This is Wednesday. We're finishing up our conference. It's been unbelievable. Many of us began over the weekend with dozens of committee meetings. You were with us through that. All the sessions that we had, really great technical sessions and the like. Of course, our Rail Rodeo, an event that we had as well. It's been a magnificent week here in Toronto. And I once again want to thank our hosts here and the TTC, Rick Leary and his staff at TTC. The staff that's here from TTC, if you would just take a quick little stand up so we can thank you. And I know I spoke with Rick a few moments ago as he was here to greet us this morning, and he had to leave for another meeting. Understandable, we really kind of monopolized his time over the last 5 days. Not easy to do when you're moving 1.7 million people a day, right? But again, thanks to TTC, great leadership and support. We loved our time here. We will come back when we can. And Greg, it was a terrific visit last summer that we had throughout Canada. And as I've said on a couple occasions here, we started in Montreal, went to Ottawa, spent time here in Toronto and to Vancouver. The innovation that's going on here in Canada, the investment in public transport is nothing short of phenomenal. And there are many, many lessons that we took back to the U.S., including a final report that we've made available for our membership, certainly P3, and now how that's evolved in your own thinking and delivery has been extraordinarily useful to all of us. So again, thank you for sharing with us the great experiences and knowledge that you have as well. And I want to really thank all of you who've made this conference just a huge success. Your participation here, your engagement in our meetings and our sessions, again, helping us as APTA to take forward the issues that are so critical to your individual success and to our collective success, and that is to build better cities, better communities. That's really what we're all about. You can talk rail, you can talk bus, you can talk all the broad mobility issues. At the end of the day, what our communities are expecting of us is to be the integrators. To be the integrators as thought leaders in terms of what we're delivering for our communities. So many thanks for that. With that, I'd like to take a quick little pause here and make a transition. This is the conclusion of our Rail Conference here in Toronto, but I want to alert you to another conference coming up next June in San Francisco, which will be the 2020 Rail Conference. And so please help me welcome to the stage Lita Rogier, Senior Operations Manager for Rail at San Francisco Muni, and Frederick Edwards, Assistant Chief Transportation Officer at the Bay Area Rapid Transit District, BART. They're going to show you a little bit about what's in store next June.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to stand here along with my colleague, Frederick Edwards, BART Assistant Chief Transportation Officer. The San Francisco Municipal Transit Agency, as you've heard, will be hosting in conjunction with BART the 2020 Rail Rodeo. The San Francisco rail system currently transports daily an average of 725,000 passengers, and we continue to increase it. We are in the process of receiving new trains, and as you, many other agencies are in the same situation where our fleet has aged, it is necessary to be able to get the new system in place in order to have better on-time performance, reliability, and capacity. So therefore, it'll be our pleasure to hold the 2020 Rail Rodeo. In a little bit, we'll be showing you a clip of the many beautiful things that San Francisco has to offer when you all decide to come and join us. Thank you.
Good morning, APTA family. How are you? Outstanding. Again, thank you, Toronto, for a beautiful time we've had this week. On behalf of the Board of Directors for the San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit District, better known as BART, and our General Manager, Grace Cunningham, I'd like to invite you all to come to San Francisco Bay Area, the west side and the east side, and come and have a good time with us at our rail conference and rodeo. We have many things going on at BART. We right now currently carry about 430,000 passengers on daily trips, mostly into San Francisco, downtown San Francisco. We have just completed arranging funding for the tripod of our core capacity improvement, which is 1,000 new cars, a new train control system, which we're selecting a vendor here soon, and then also our Hayward maintenance shop, which has been expanded greatly to be able to handle those 1,000 brand new cars from Bombardier. So we got a lot going on. By the end of the year, we should open into San Jose, Santa Clara County, and start planning on a second extension into downtown. So there's a lot going on, a lot we'll be able to share with you when you come next year. Again, looking forward to having you.
Exciting. Great week here in Toronto. We'll move on to another great city next June as well. So before we conclude, we have a special treat for you, right? The fun was all week long, but there's still some fun yet to be had, and that is we've got a drawing. I think we've made that known to you. You should have had an opportunity to drop in our drum over here a ticket or a business card with your name. We're going to do a drawing, and you have 2 chances to win. The first is for a free registration at any upcoming APTA meeting and conference, and the second, a $500 gift card. Both sound fantastic, don't they? I mean, the registration for APTA, you're going to have to wait to a next meeting. The $500 you can spend right here in Toronto. Is that okay, Greg? Okay with you guys? If that's spent here, or you may choose to spend it elsewhere. What can I tell you? But, all right, so I'm going to have, I think, the privilege here of picking 2 winners. Is that right? Do you want me just to reach into this drum? Do I need to move it around or anything? Probably should. Probably should? Okay. I don't want to screw it all up here, you know. Here we go. Aha, opened it up. I am. I can turn the crank. All right, let me pick this one here. So, this says, if I can read it, Linda Scroggins, Dallas Area Rapid Transit. I should have said, you got to be here to win. So that's the only requirement and only rule. Is Linda here? All right, come on up, come on up. Come on up, Linda. I'm so glad you're here. It's never fun to pick these out and the person's not there. Come on up on the stage for a moment. Congratulations to you. Happy to give you this. If there's anything you want to say to our teammates out here, you're please welcome to do that. Not to put you on the spot or anything, you know. So which meeting do you think you're going to attend? Good for you.
I'm not sure just yet,
Okay.
but we'll see.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Hey, congratulations, Linda. Thank you. All right, here we go. I'm going to pick out a second one here. Let me move it around. Dig deep. Got it? Okay. And the winner is Scott McIntosh. Scott McIntosh. Is Scott McIntosh here? He is. I can't tell, Scott, what your affiliation is. You can come tell us. And this was for the $500 gift card. Scott, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
There you go. I'm reading your badge here. Ah, hey. I see it. I see it now. Go ahead.
I'm with Edmonton Transit, but grew up in Ontario. So again, thanks for everyone to come to Canada, and hope you enjoyed the week. I was really hoping on that trip to San Francisco next year, but $500 is pretty good too. So thank you all.
Thank you, Scott. Well, Scott, you know, we still like to see you in San Francisco, you know, so plan on that trip. Well, listen, we're going to conclude here this morning. It is this morning still. Thank you all again for participating with us. It's been just a phenomenal week. Everything that's occurred from our meetings to our conference sessions to the rodeo, it really could not have been better. And again, we thank our Canadian colleagues here for just the wonderful job they've done to host us. We will be back. But as you begin to leave, we have one little plug to make, and it's in the form of a video. We have our annual meeting, which has been renamed and reimagined as Transform. It will occur in New York City in October. So take a look, enjoy, safe travels, and we look to see you again very, very soon. Thanks for all your good work.
Hi, I'm Ronnie Hakem, MTA's Managing Director here in New York.
And I'm Polly Trottenberg, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Transportation.
And we're thrilled that New York is going to be hosting the 2019 APTA annual meeting. And we're inviting all of you to join us next year.
Because there is no place like New York to see all the great things public transportation can do.
Holly, shall we check if everything's getting ready?
Let's go. Make sure everything's running smoothly.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Public transportation makes New York City great.
We're gonna do it. Give us any chance, we'll take it. Read us any rule, we'll break it. We're gonna make our dreams come true. Doing it our way. Nothing's gonna turn us back now. Straight ahead and on the track now. We're gonna make our dreams come true. Doing it our way. There's nothing we won't try. Never heard the word impossible this time. There's no stopping us. We're gonna do it. On your mark, get set and go now. Got a dream and we just know now. We're gonna make that dream come true. And we'll do it our way, yes, our way. Make our dreams come true. And we'll do it our way, yes, our way. Make our dreams come true. For me and you.
What do you think? I think we're in good shape.
I think we're ready.
We'll see you in October 2019.